well, let's just jump right in. I want to thank everybody for joining today. I know it's one more webinar after a week full of online classes, so I do really appreciate everybody joining us this morning. Of course, there would be nothing that I'd like more than if we were all in Miller Auditorium enjoying a mimosa and a waffle together, but in lieu of that, I know we'll be together again soon, and I know we'll be able to celebrate all of you. Either way, we are just so proud of all of you getting through 4 years, and certainly want to start this by wishing you congratulations on getting here and looking forward to the next steps. One of the major questions that we often get asked and hear from alumni is the fact that there's such a tumultuous transition between being a part of an Eckerd community, such a close bubble for 4 years, and then having to transition out into the world to something else. And so this presentation is really about trying to give you all the insights that we might have had over the roller coasters of changes in our careers and lives, and how to kind of settle into finding new communities and new organizations after you graduate. And I can promise you that this is a very hopeful and positive presentation and message. So as many of you know, my name is Grant Bailey. I'm the Associate Dean and the Director of Career Services Office. And I'm just excited to share a little bit of my story with you guys, and also some ideas and thoughts that we've had to be able to help you. Our overview for today, I think you can't let go of one community without experiencing some sort of emotional change and maybe even some sort of grief. And so we brought Linda Abbott in today to talk a little bit about, how do we even let go or begin to start to let go of Eckerd, and what kind of questions might come up and how to deal with those questions. So I am not an expert in that area, so I thought bringing one in would be the best way forward. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about community. Really, what are communities? How do professional and personal communities differ from each other, and how might you kind of navigate those waters after graduating? And how do you meet new people as an adult? It's much different than in college. So we're going to go through some pointers there. But for right now, let's talk about Eckerd, and let's talk about leaving. And I'm going to leave it in the hands of Linda for a little bit. You're still muted.
I was trying not to step on your toes and muted myself again. Good morning, everybody. I just want to echo Grant that this would be a lot more fun if we were all together, and I look forward to being together again at some point. And I know that for seniors, that's going to look different, and so we're going to talk about that a little bit. And for those of you, I think, Naomi, you've probably heard me talk about grief before. I don't know if any of you other participants have. I always do a talk about grief when I do RA and peer mentor training during autumn term, because they are, during autumn term, feeling a mentor, an advisor role for students who are going through the grief of leaving high school and coming to college. And there are so many different times in our life when we go through a transition that involves grief. And I thought particularly this year, Grant and I kind of felt it would be important to talk about that. So Grant, if you can go to the first slide. So I love this quote in particular to kind of describe what grief is. The normal and natural, which to me is so important. Grief is normal, grief is natural, grief is something that we all experience. So it's a normal and natural emotional reaction to loss or change of any kind. We tend to think about grief more when we think about losing a loved one, when we think about death. We grieve all different kinds of things throughout different times in our lives. It is neither a pathological condition nor a personality disorder. There is nothing wrong with you when you go through grief. It is a very important healing process that the more we understand and the more we acknowledge, I think the better off we are dealing with. So that's why I think it's important for us to talk about it today. All right, Grant, you can go ahead. Oh, we skipped one. Nope. There we go. All right. So we don't always think about the fact that during some of the happiest times in our lives and the most exciting and joyous transitions in our lives, we are often grieving at the same time. Grief and joy are not mutually exclusive. So when I talk to peer mentors and RAs about incoming freshmen, incoming first years, we talk about the fact that they are grieving leaving home for the first time, many of them. They are grieving leaving their high school friends, their communities back home. And that's where I think this really ties in when we're talking about community today. Leaving one community and joining another is a time where you're going to be grieving and hopefully excited and joyful about the future. It's important to allow room for both and acknowledge both. The fact that you are sad about leaving college and saying goodbye to friends does not mean that you are not excited about your future. You're going to be riding quite a wave, and this year, your class more than ever is going to be, we talk about grief coming in waves. It can kind of come in and knock you over out of nowhere and really take you by surprise. And sometimes in moments you don't necessarily expect it to. Acknowledge it, talk about it with someone you trust. I tell this story every year during this training because it, to me, is such a fantastic example of everything I just talked about. So I met my best friend when I graduated college, which I'm going to talk about a little bit in a minute. But when I graduated college and started my first job, and this woman is still my best friend, many more than I want to admit years later. And we had been friends for several years and, just kind of did everything together and were attached at the hip. And she met someone, fell in love, and they were getting married. And she is still married to this man and they have a wonderful marriage, but she was so excited about getting married. But she's also someone, her name is Danny. Danny is incredibly emotionally healthy and has an ability to talk about her emotion in a way that's probably why we're good friends. It's no surprise that as a mental health professional, I've sought out friends who are highly emotionally healthy and able to talk about their feelings. She came to my house one day and sat me down and said, I'm really grieving the fact that I know our friendship is going to change. And I know it's going to look different when I'm married. I'm not going to be able to do everything at the drop of a hat with you because there's going to be this other person in my life that I need to consider. And I don't want us to not talk about this and grow apart because that would be awful and we would both be so sad. And I just immediately started crying. Like the acknowledgement of the grief and just the gift that she was giving me of allowing us that space to talk about it was really emotional. And I was so grateful. And I've never forgotten it. And I've tried to use it as an example in my own life when I'm going through transition. And she was someone who was a very safe person for me. We trust each other. We've talked about, everything under the sun. And having that conversation allowed our friendship to transition to this new place in our life and grow. And not, I just talked to her on the phone last week. Like we've never lost that friendship. And that was, she's been married, I think 13 years now. So yeah, things have maybe 15. Anyway, a long time. And we've been able to continue that throughout. And I also want to acknowledge for you all, and I'm going to come back to this a little bit, but sometimes when we're going through a transition, particularly something like a graduation, there's often a lot of ritual involved in that. The ritual of the commencement ceremony, the ritual of those last days on campus that you're together and you're, having a great time, but crying because you're saying goodbye. And I want to acknowledge that we know you've lost that. We know that that has been taken away from you by no one's fault except this horrible virus. And I want you to think about how you can give each other that as best you can from a distance. There's not going to be these built-in on-campus rituals, but I want you all to think about how you can be deliberate about whether that's, hopefully even participating in the virtual commencement, seeking out time to talk to friends, acknowledging the grief, acknowledging how sad you are that you may not have been able to say those goodbyes in person, and then plan for a time when this is hopefully beyond us when you can do that. All right, Grant, you can go forward. So we talk a lot. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is kind of the consider she's passed, but the expert who kind of she came up with these stages of grief that you've probably all heard of and we've all talked about. Her work was actually with people who were dying, and I still feel like these stages often still make sense for anything that we are going through as it relates to grief. So the stages of grief are denial. At the risk of oversharing, I lost a cat recently that I really, really grieved about that. I'd had her for about 12 years and it was really sad. But because I talk about grief a lot, I noticed some of those feelings I was having as I was going through it, like denial, like, maybe this, maybe she's going to be okay. Maybe this, I went through a lot of denial at first. And then, I was angry. I was angry that this happened. I was particularly angry because it happened when I knew we were about to potentially go into quarantine and that was going to be really hard. The depression, when we were still on campus and I would come home in early March, I would just cry every day because, for 12 years I'd come home and she was there. Bargaining can look different for different people, but, there's a bargaining of like, please, if you will let her live, if she will be okay, then, I will be the best cat mom ever. I mean, I kind of was anyway, but, there's all kinds of bargaining that we do, bargaining with ourselves, bargaining with God. And then we eventually get to a place of acceptance. The thing that's really important, and especially as we think about grief coming in these waves, is that we talk about these in stages, but that there is no definite order to this. When I've given this talk previously, I use a scene from the movie Still Magnolias, which probably came out before you were born.
And Still a great movie, though.
What?
Still a great movie, though.
Oh, it is. There's a great scene in that movie where you see one of the characters basically go through all 5 stages of grief in one scene. It's one of the best movie scenes of all time. It's Sally Field, who's an incredible actress. And and so we want grief to be this straight line, right? We want it to be from one. Oh, good, Naomi. I'm glad that you remember it. It's so good. If you haven't seen the movie Still Magnolias, it is very sad. Maybe don't watch it right now, but at some point it's worth seeing. We want grief to be, linear, and it's not. We will feel sometimes all of these in one day. This picture to me sums it up so well. This is what we want it to look like. This is what it really looks like. And so as you have these, different conflicting emotions of excitement about your future, which I think for you all at this point is going to be harder than it has been for those in the past. Your future is going to be much more unclear, if we're just being honest about it. Like, the future is unclear. Excuse me. I know I'm not supposed to touch my face, but it's just me here. And my nose itched. So, acknowledge your grief. Acknowledge the grief you have about the loss of these last days. Acknowledge the grief that you have just about the fact that you're leaving this Eckerd community that has been your family for the last 4 years. And also try to allow yourself to feel that joy of what is to come and to feel some hope towards that. All right, Grant, you can go to the next slide.
So, I'm doing terrible at moving these slides.
That's okay. Grant and I both talked about, we thought it would be helpful to share a little bit of our own transitions in life. So I grew up in Oxford, Mississippi, which is the home of Ole Miss, and went to college in my hometown. So I spent, all of my undergrad in the same town I grew up in. And then when I graduated, I moved to Nashville, Tennessee. It was really the first time I'd ever moved anywhere on my own. And by on my own, I did have 2 friends who moved with me and roomed with me. But it was a brand new city. I moved without a job. I got a temp job that led to a permanent job. That's where I met my friend Danny, who I just talked about, who's still my friend these years later. And then after 9 years there, I felt like it was time for another transition. I actually moved back to my hometown and went to work at the University of Mississippi. I went to work at their counseling center. I did violence prevention work there. And after 6 years there, I decided that it was time for me to go back to school once again. And I moved to Fayetteville, Arkansas, completely by myself to go to school, and I knew no one. It was unbelievably scary and exciting. It ended up being 3 fantastic years. I literally just texted this morning with one of my friends from Fayetteville. We both have Peloton bikes, and we like to schedule and ride our bikes at the same time so we can virtually high-five each other. That's one of the ways we're connecting during this weird time. And then after that, I saw an ad for a job at Eckerd College, which I adopted a new cat who was playing with a toy under my feet. So if you hear a weird noise, that is what that is. She's out of my reach to make it stop. But I had never heard of Eckerd College. It turns out that Lori Makenberg, who hired me and was my boss at the time, had also gone to graduate school at the University of Arkansas. We had both worked at the counseling center there, and she knew all about me before I ever met her because we had mutual. It's really interesting. You will learn as you go to these new communities, smaller world than you think it is. You will find connections where you don't expect. And that was really comforting to me because we at least had friends in common. So I moved to St. Pete. I'd never been here until I came for my interview. Of course, I fell in love with it, and I fell in love with Eckerd. And 5 years later, here I am. I made both of those last 2 transitions really completely alone. And it's been 2 of the best moves I've ever made. You can go ahead, Grant. So what do you do with this grief? And I don't want to take too much time because I want Grant to have plenty of time to talk about community. But I've alluded to this a little bit, but naming it. Name not just the grief. The more you can kind of acknowledge those different stages, name the stages as you go through them. So when I was leaving Tennessee and leaving Nashville and moving back to Mississippi, I went through a phase where I'm going to take that back, a different story. I was living in Nashville, and one of my best friends there was moving away. She actually moved away right before I did. And every time I interacted with her, I felt angry. And I kept like snapping at her and getting frustrated with her and being very irritable with her. And she finally was like, "What is going on? Why do you seem so mad at me?" And I cried. I was like, "I'm not mad at you. I'm sad that you're leaving. And I'm scared about what that means for our friendship." And it was just, when we don't acknowledge our emotion, it does what I call come out sideways. It comes out in not as healthy ways. As soon as I named it, the anger went away. I was not angry with her. I love her. I was just sad. And so those emotions often get confused. Being able to talk about it allowed me to not feel stuck. It is not uncommon to get kind of stuck in one of these stages. Anger is often one of them. Depression is often one of them. If you feel stuck, talk about it, whether that is with a trusted friend. If you need to seek professional help, talk to a counselor. Even as you move to new communities as an alum, we will help you through the counseling center if you need us to try to help you find a counselor in the community where you're moving. There's a lot of virtual telehealth counseling going on right now if you're struggling with this transition already. Above anything, be compassionate, above all with yourself. Practice self-compassion and be compassionate for others who are going through this with you. The other seniors who are graduating, the underclassmen who are coming up and unsure about what's coming up for them in the fall, for your faculty and your staff who are also going through a lot of their own grief and trying to support you, but mostly for yourselves. Be compassionate and kind to each other. And as we think about leaving the Eckerd community and what that means, so many of us, our identity becomes attached to our college, right? I see that in Eckerd students more than any other college where I've worked. The Eckerd identity is so strong. The Eckerd community is so strong. And so this identity as an Eckerd student that you're not shedding completely, but moving away from and towards a new identity is, again, something to grieve and something to be excited about. And Grant is going to talk to you more about what it means to sort of transition from this Eckerd community to the new community, that whatever that looks like, even if you're still going to be in St. Pete, it's going to be a new community, a new work community, new friendships, that sort of thing. So Grant, if that's okay, I'm going to pass it off to you, let you talk a little bit about that.
Thank you so much. I mean, I feel like grief is one of those things that everybody goes through, but we just don't talk about it quite enough. And
Yeah.
the irony is always that when you start it, it feels like it will never end.
Yes.
But acceptance inevitably comes at some point or another. Even
oh my gosh.
So I think that's the counterbalance to the beginning of it is the end. And somehow,
not to go back, even because it's recent. When I lost my cat, a few, I was crying every day, and I was like, I'm gonna do this every day, and I don't do it every day anymore. I miss her, but I don't cry every day. And I have reached some place of acceptance, but it can feel very overwhelming at times. And just acknowledging that you feel overwhelmed, but you're not going to stay there forever. Even if you don't believe it, keep telling yourself that.
For sure. Amen. Oh, here was the piece about identity.
Well, I'll add this. So this is really kind of what I want Grant to talk about. What new identities are you going to be excited to explore? And I think that is a place of hope, and it doesn't mean being fake or being different. It means, what am I going to look like as a professional? What does it mean? How am I going to view myself differently? And what do I want that to look like? And who are people that I want to emulate and that I admire who are professionals? So
thank you for that. Yeah. And there's tens of thousands of alumni who, you can find and you can see. And that's why we bring them to campus so often and have panels so that they can share those stories. As many people heard in the first day of senior series, you would not be the only person to have gone through this. And so I want to talk about, again, I think so much of what the senior series is about is all of us who are presenting coming from the perspective of, I wish there were things I had known when I graduated undergrad. And that's really just our sort of way of trying to share those lessons and those experiences with all of you. So a little bit about my journey. I was not, although I was sad to leave my family, I was actually thrilled to go off to college and try something new and live on my own. And fast forward, when I graduated from Florida Gulf Coast in Fort Myers, I felt really connected to the place. I was deeply embedded in the community, deeply embedded in the work. I was involved in so many clubs and organizations, and just, pulling myself away from that place was an effort in and of itself. And at the same time that I graduated, it was the worst recession. Every bit of news that was happening from the television was about how we're all not going to get jobs and what's going to happen and all that stuff. And, the good news is we all ended up, getting jobs, and H1N1 had just broken out. So we couldn't shake the hand of our president when we walked across the stage. And while I'll never forget those days, they really do feel like just some distant memory, just this little bit of time away. It hasn't been all that long. And so I know it is nothing compared to what you all are going through, but it is a little bit of, I just want to share that there is hope. We will get through this. And I think the global nature of this current crisis, the fact that there's nowhere to hide from it, there's nowhere to go from it, and so many people are pouring so much energy and effort into trying to solve this. I'm confident that we will get there. And our office is constantly looking up employers right now who are even doing well in this crisis. So if you haven't engaged with us, or you haven't been looking on Triton Track, you should, because I think Michael Norberg is finding close to 100 jobs a week still. And posting those into Triton Track. So there is still hope, even though you may turn on the TV and feel like there isn't any. There is. Leaving the swamps of South Florida, I went up to the mountains of North Carolina. Again, by myself. I left a partner who then was long distance for 2 years, and that was one of the hardest things. To this tiny little mountain town where the school outnumbered the town folk, I think 7-1. We were 2 hours from an airport, and it was just a completely different change of pace, a completely different life, a completely different culture shock for me. And I had to go through so many changes to be able to sort of adapt to that new kind of environment and still find my way. After that, we moved, my partner and I moved to New York City. If that wasn't a shell shock, going from a tiny mountain town in Appalachia to New York City, That was one of the biggest adventures I think I've had. And anybody from I didn't that many times in New York before I moved, which seemed pretty crazy looking back on it all. But it was a phenomenal 2 years. I can tell you, my grief for Boone though, I could like think about the mountains and feel like that like punch in the throat because I loved it so much. It was just so beautiful that it was like, hard. The concrete jungle was just such a contrast. It took me a long time to get to the place of accepting that I was even just in a new community. And then by the time I think I accepted it, I was off again, packing the Home Depot boxes, moving our whole lives, leaving our friends to come home to St. Pete, where I've been ever since. And so, through each one of those journeys, I've learned a lot about what community for me really is. And one of the most important things, I'll share 3 ideas here. Number one is that to be a part of a community, to be a part of another human group, I think is essential for human existence. It's how we've evolved. It's who we are. It's natural. So I think to be a functioning person, to be able to move to a new place, to try new things, part of the most important piece isn't making sure that, you have that desk built from IKEA. It's figuring out who's going to support you, on a Tuesday night, or who to talk to on a Saturday or a Friday, because we crave those kind of social interactions. And I think you can see that evident in the way people are Zoom hanging out, even in their social circles right now. The other thing that I've learned is that you have so much control and choice in this matter. You don't have to suffer a bad community. You don't have to suffer a mean or indignant community. You can change. And a lot of what a community is how you yourself define it and where you find it. And so whether it's based on the sense of place where you live, there's a lot of community, just the fact that I live in New York City, I live in St. Petersburg, whether it's a feeling of belonging and there is no place to tie you to it, a shared experience, a sense of purpose, or just interconnected relationships. What you say I'm a part of is really up to you, and you can choose that for yourself. And then going back sort of to our grief conversation, all communities, this is the central nature of group dynamics, right? Groups begin and then they dissolve, or they may change. And so just understanding that any community that you join is not forever. Even if you think it is, even if it's imposed on you, you are a U.S. citizen because you are born here, doesn't mean that people don't change their citizenship too, or their identity of which country they live in if they decide to move somewhere else. So I think reminding yourself that, these are not static things. These are constantly changing ebb and flow natures of your life will give you a greater sense of understanding when they're coming and going. I always like to say some of the closest communities I've ever been a part of, tiny, are alternative spring break trips. You get to know these people day in, day out. You get this sense that you have this shared purpose and you're all on the bus together and going to this organization and you're going to help. And it's always such a stark contrast how I feel at the end of those trips. I'm so close with the people that I've met. But then I know as soon as we get to the airport, that community is not the same anymore. I'll still always have those relationships. But that as a group, as an individual community, has come to an end. And so I think using that experience has also helped me transition from one to another, and just accepting that these things can be impermanent and are impermanent. Now, let's talk about one of the most significant and important communities you will join, and that is your work community, your workplace, and your work life. This is why you spend years thinking about it. This is why we spend decades refining it. And this is why we talk about it so much, and probably why there's a career services office on college campuses, right? Is because this is a significant portion of your life. No doubt 40 hours a week is more than you'll probably spend going out with friends, going out and volunteering, joining any kind of organization outside of work. Work is a central focus of people's lives. So it's important to think through because there's so many things that come from it. And if you think about all the things we just talked about that make up community, by and large, workplaces and professional communities tick off almost all the boxes. You have constant communication with others. They're often tied to a location or a structure. Even if you're remote, there's probably a headquarters or some sort of satellite office somewhere. It offers you an identity. It offers you a title. People often ask, what's your name, what's your major, and where are you from in college? And after you graduate, it's what's your name, where do you live, and what do you do for a living? It's just this kind of transition. So it does become a central focus of people's lives. It gives them a sense of purpose. And obviously there's a financial reward to all of this. You've got people make money from working. That's just a reality. But also there's an altruistic nature. So many Eckerd students always tell me, I want to do something that is going to be meaningful to myself and to the world, and not just be about the financial gains. So there's a lot of pieces and a lot that goes in emotionally into the work communities that we choose. The one thing I'm going to argue to you, again, because this is the section about life and in the senior series, professional communities are distinctly different from personal ones. There is not many friend groups you will meet that you have to submit a resume and a statement of interest and do an interview for. Even the way that we join the work community is vastly different than most of the other areas of our life, save maybe Ole Miss sororities and community and fraternities are the ones that I had known, right? It's an interesting way of joining a community, but by and large, it's distinctly different. We definitely they meld together, they're interconnected, but we talk a little bit different, we code switch a little bit, we dress differently, we may hold back on certain things, and all that is okay. There's not to say that anything is wrong with that. It's just recognizing that there is a difference. But why is there a difference? Here's what I'll say. You'll definitely, just like Linda said, meet people in your workplace that may become your best friend. You may meet a couple people. You may have your best work friend and they stay at work, right? And maybe they don't. There is definitely some barriers in between the two. But what I would argue is that you always should question how much of your professional community is influencing your personal one and vice versa, right? So should this job be my only and primary source for personal friendships? I would argue that it shouldn't. And the following reasons is because there's going to be politics no matter what. Even in the flattest organization, there's hierarchy, there's structure, there's roles, there's responsibilities, there's all these things. And so just the very nature of these organizations, I don't think lend themselves, again, to the number one spot to choose, your personal relationships. Obviously, people can act differently when it's tied to their money and their livelihood and they have to pay their bills. There's a different level of, if I leave this work community, there's consequences that, if I leave my soul cycle class, that there's not, and that is just another nature of work. Let's go in the right direction. Lack of control. I can choose when I leave the tennis club. I don't need to play tennis anymore. I hurt my old shoulder. I don't need to play tennis. But work, it's a lot harder, and someone can say, sorry, you, because of all these external circumstances, as we've seen even in the last couple months, sometimes you don't have full control over these communities. So you do have to have a little bit of distance since you don't fully control them. I think there's also just a personal desire and need for change. And that can lead to a lack of longevity. We talked about some of this in the first senior series about the likelihood that you all will change positions and careers and employers and professional communities. We know even for boomers, they had 12 jobs, maybe 12 different communities. And I think, we don't have anybody on the call right now about, who has traveled a lot for the military, but you think you can even have one position like with the military and be changing communities all the time, be sort of starting over all the time, which is an interesting idea, and how that relates to a professional and personal world. But we know that the younger you get, the more it's going to trend towards having more jobs. And to some degree, that's somewhat freeing. You don't have to stick with the same company that you started with when you were 21 until you're 45. I personally kind of like the flexibility and the freedom of that. And I think you should too. But it is, again, not anything good or bad. It is just acknowledging the reality of sort of what is. So if we get, too attached to our workplace communities, again, I think these stages of grief and the way of pulling away from it can be very, very challenging. So the takeaways from, thinking about the workplace community is find and establish your professional communities, because the benefits they offer are sort of countless, innumerable, will give you so much value and benefit to your life, that you do really need these. If you plug in your industry, aquariums, for example, and professional associations into Google, you will find state, local, regional, national organizations that even, put you in contact with like-minded professionals, even outside of your immediate employer. And those are phenomenal opportunities. So you've got to have these. The second is just to not get too attached to your professional communities, to recognize the distinctions and know when to open up and how far to open up the dams in between these two lakes of your life, right? It's okay to let there be a little give and take, but how much is in your control?
Grant, can I add something right there?
Yes, please.
So I talked earlier a few times about my friend Danny and that I met her at work. I, in thinking back on that work relationship and our current relationship, our work relationship was more, we saw each other during work. We had lunch together a lot. It really wasn't until we both moved to different jobs that our relationship evolved to what it is now. And I think it's because there was this sort of, we're work friends. It's just different in some way. And so a lot of my friends I have currently, I have met through work, but the relationships tend to evolve differently when we get beyond that atmosphere and that environment. And so I just wanted to add that because I did talk about a work friend, but our relationship evolved to something much deeper and more meaningful when we weren't colleagues anymore.
Amen. And I will also say too that, there's going to be various influences in different workplaces. Some people are going to say, "Oh, it's totally cool to date your colleagues," and some people are going to say, "No, absolutely not. You can't even go to lunch with someone who doesn't have an equivalent title." You will see the spectrum from one end to the other. What I would encourage you to do is know that it's your life, it's your professional, your professional credentials on the line and your personal life on the line. So you have to figure out what makes sense for you and where the barriers are, and don't let people influence you one way or the other. If it feels like, no, we're not going to let those two mix, or it feels, oh yeah, it's totally fine, we're going to go to happy hour and everybody's going to have a good time, and I'll learn a little bit about how their family's doing or whatever. That is totally up to you, and you'll have to navigate those waters. But I would always caution, especially for new professionals, it's better to go a little bit wary of those relationships, and maybe don't disclose a little too much, too early, too fast. So it's okay to, say, this is my work life and I'm leaving it there, until I can really figure out the waters and not get myself into trouble.
So I'll just to add to that really quickly, Grant, I generally have a don't date, don't dip your pen in the company ink. I don't think that I don't want to date someone at work and then break up and have to see them every day. That's just me personally. My friend Danny married her coworker. They worked at a newspaper. It was a very casual, it's a different kind of atmosphere than ones that I've worked in, but you're going to see varying levels of that. I just thought that was funny that as you said that, because I don't think of them as colleagues anymore. They've been married for so long, and don't work together. But anyway, just throwing that.
Yeah, no one wants to lose their livelihood, right? Because you went on a date. I mean, it's just the reality. So again, this isn't, no one's going to tell you do this, don't do this. Here's, definitely know the company rules or the organizational rules and where the lines are from HR's perspective, but then set your own. Okay, now the fun part, right? You have graduated Eckerd College. Congratulations. Now we've got to meet new people. And make new friends and make new relationships and make new, all kinds of connections, to be able to feel like you're a part of these new communities that you're joining. Here's my Corona caveat. A lot of the things I'm going to talk about, I realize we're all going to, be sad that we can't do those right now. So here's what I'll say. While we can't go out to some of the things and do some of the things I'm about to talk about, in the meantime, nurture the relationships you have. This is the time to write postcards, to send emails, to check in on folks. I checked on a friend that I was best friends with in high school and still know, who lives not far from me. I hadn't talked to in probably 6-7 months, just to make sure that they were okay, just because I was thinking about them. So, in lieu of not being able to go out and make new friends, you've got to cherish the ones you have. And I think I was telling Linda as we were preparing for all this, one of my biggest regrets from undergrad was that I really just I wasn't intentional about keeping those relationships alive from undergrad. People that I had known for 4 or 5 years, just adored, right? I didn't connect with them. I was just got my head into the books in grad school, got into the research, and then the next thing you know, 2 years had passed. They had moved on, they married, there's so many things that changed. So when I left New York, I thought, I'm never going to do that again. So I'm still really close with the friends that I had in New York, still pretty close with the friends that I had in grad school, but it takes work and it takes effort to nurture and cherish those relationships. So in lieu of doing what we're doing, just keep up with the people that you know right now. So here's the thing. again, seniors and alumni tell us all the time, I love doing these things at Eckerd, but I didn't know how to do them after I graduated. So this is not an exhaustive list, but I just wanted to give you some examples and some ideas. Physical fitness and sports is a huge portion of a lot of your lives, especially if you were NCAA, right? Especially if you were club rugby. We know how this, all you guys get. And even CrossFit. After Eckerd, there's fitness centers, there's club leagues, there's fitness groups now. I can't believe how many new gyms and fitness groups have developed in the last 10 or 20 years. And if you've been to the LA Fitness and how different it is from an Equinox and how different it is from a 24-hour fitness, you can see that there are different communities just within the gym. I am not a CrossFitter, but I will recognize that those people have figured out the social aspect of working, of working out together. It was pretty remarkable. And that's the thing I admire about them. Even Soul Cycle and Orange Theory, it's a little, I like them from a distance. They're a little cultish to me, but I recognize and appreciate everybody who gets into that kind of stuff. Tampa Bay Club Sports is an amazing organization in Tampa Bay where you can literally pay a nominal fee, go get some cleats or some gear, and join 20, 30 different sports. You could spend most of your free time after work or on the weekends doing sports. Vertical Ventures is still out there. I even put the Naga is a gay softball league, if you want to really get specific, that my partner and I joined when we moved back to St. Pete. And I remember, I don't have that many friends still from high school back here. How are we going to make friends? How are we going to feel like we know this place again? Most of the friends I have today are either friends from those first couple teams that we joined or friends of friends that we made through those teams. So it was a pivotal part of us being able to settle in and feel like, okay, this is feeling like home. And it didn't feel like home, even though we had a home. Didn't feel like home until we had the relationships. Mental and spiritual wellness, there is no doubt that people join religious communities because of the community they provide, right? So if you were interested in Center for Spiritual Life or meditation, you can find equivalents outside of Eckerd. If you relied on outreach and counseling services and all of that, of course, without a doubt, continue that work when you graduate. Don't just, lose sight of that. I don't know if Lynn was going to say something. Yeah. When it comes to houses of worship and all of that, again, I think everyone knows how many different opportunities there are in this country for that. So I was really into Zen and meditation when I was about to graduate college, and it was just a really important centering piece for my life. And I got so overwhelmed in grad school that one day I booked a 3-day silent weekend retreat at some Zen center, 2 hours from grad school, and just went and sat and looked at a wall for 2 days. I know it's not for everybody, but it's still an experience I will never forget. And although I didn't get to know the people there that well because we couldn't talk, I had a deep connection with everybody there because we were doing such an odd thing for a couple of days. And it was just a really great experience. So I remember this thing from undergrad. I remember it helped me. Let me go find that now in grad school. So and I continue to join, do some of these organizations now. And of course, if stress is taking over your life, you've got to find ways to release that in order to be a good friend. And you cannot be a good friend or be a good member of a community unless you're being good to yourself. And so that's kind of the center part of all of this. Clubs and organizations, they're endless. So if you were at Stitch and Bitch, there's a Bay Area Knitting Guild, and there's a beekeeping club on campus. I haven't known many students who have done it, but it sounds really interesting. Sounds great. There's a Tampa Bay Beekeeping Association. Delta Sigma Pi, right? Professional organizations. Again, as I was saying, you just type in professional organizations. There's actually a Tampa Bay young professionals group that it's only people under 30, all different types of careers, all different types of places they're from. And they just get together and basically have social, hours and all of that. And I'm sure they will again soon. I was thinking about clubs, people who have done tutoring and teaching assistants and Spanish club, right? And I have a friend who volunteers at the Suncoast Citizenship Project. She's really good with Spanish, and a lot of the people studying to become U.S. citizens, Spanish is their primary language. And so she was able to go to that organization and not only use her history of our country, but, and our communities, but also her language skills to be able to help other people pass the citizenship test. And I just thought that was a great kind of parallel. It doesn't have to be club for club. There are definitely dotted lines to all of this to try to use those skills. I had a great friend who was a part of the Largo local theater as a techie, was not an actor, but was a techie for years and years, and had a whole friend group just because they would go a couple times a week to this theater organization. So if you're in the theater troupe, maybe that's the place for you. So think about what you do, think about what you love from Eckerd, and then find the ways to use that into real life. And I promise you will find something out there. There is always something for pretty much everyone, no matter what they're coming from Eckerd. And I would actually say, for the seniors that I've met with, when I say, oh, looking at their resume, and I say, oh, what did you do with this club and organization? They're like, oh, I just went to 2 meetings. I didn't even do much with it. This is an opportunity to maybe find the time to reignite your interest in those particular areas. So if you've never done some of these things, now you can. You'll have time to do it. Reflective service learning, obviously you all were compelled to do 40 hours, but we find study after studies at Eckerd alumni continue to give back to communities, continue to volunteer. So when you land in a new place, look up all the 501c3 organizations, find an organization that, pulls on your heartstrings a little bit, maybe give a couple hours a month. I've been doing Big Brother, Big Sister for 2 years, and now I've had this little mentee that I didn't know how long we would join or how long it would be, but been able to watch him grow and grow up, and it's only taken 8 hours of my month every month, and it's been so rewarding. So I think the great thing about nonprofits is if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for your schedule, maybe it's just not the right thing. It's pretty easy to step back. Again, it's a community that's easy to leave, and go find another one. Internships, I just wanted to drop this. Most employers will accept interns after graduation. So if you're going into a field that's that doesn't have a ton of opportunities for entry level, most organizations will let you intern up to 6 months past graduation. So I know that's getting back to the professional side of things, but just keep that in mind. Internships and volunteer opportunities are still out there and very numerous. Okay, let's not deny this, right? Socializing is how human beings get to know each other. And what you'll see, I'm sure you've seen all the memes and all the GIFs that when you hit your 30s, right, that this looks a lot different than in your late 20s. Embrace those changes as they happen organically. And if you've only been going to bars and clubs, once you have a full-time job and your weekend's completely free, you'll be able to do things you never were probably able to easily do in the past, right? So whether it's, events hosted by wine tastings or shows or happy hours or coming back and doing alumni engagement events in the community or going to concerts, I can promise you I have, had even more fun and more opportunities to engage with other people and do different things after undergrad than I ever did in undergrad. I was very, focused on undergrad as being, the only world that I had. And I love telling the story that the first time I ever watched a movie on a Tuesday without having any sense of guilt or remorse because I didn't have a paper due, it was like the world had become changed overnight. I'll never forget that moment. So you will find opportunities, and if you end up in the bars and clubs a little too much, look for other things to do, right? They're definitely going to open back up, and people are itching at the bit to get back into those. So here's the takeaways from personal communities, right? Your days are going to change. They're just going to look different. You're probably going to wake up a little bit earlier, depending on your job, right? The days will be longer and will probably feel longer, but the nights and the weekends will be so much more free because you don't have a lot of things hanging over your head. And if you end up having a job where you're working all day and things are hanging over your head all night and all weekend, you might want to look for a different job. There's definitely those out there. So just be mindful of all of that. And if there's lack of freedom in your life to be able to do some of these things to keep you sane, I really would encourage you to think about your life holistically and say, maybe there's a different work community I need to join. There's the grind, right? Home, work, sleep, home, work, sleep, home, work, sleep. And the next thing you know, 4 years have passed. I hear from alums all the time. They're like, oh my God, I can't believe it's been 5 years. I can't believe it's been 10 years since I graduated from Eckerd. Time does fly pretty quickly, just as it did while you were at Eckerd. But just don't let that grind become your only routine. There's way too many things out there to be able to do, even if it's during Corona and it's Zooming with people. I've seen I've seen some dance parties on YouTube. I'm like, what is going on? People putting disco. There's so many things to be able to do. So make sure that you use your free time wisely. And again, I really believe through experience that there's more to do outside of undergrad than in. So here is the major question for people. So now I've gone out on the limb and I've gone to, join the tennis club, or I've gone to join a new golf tournament or something like that. That doesn't mean that people are going to run up and be like, oh my God, please be my friend. You hope they will. So here are 3 things I'm going to encourage everybody to practice. Just 3 simple things. Number 1, you've got to be interested in other people. It doesn't matter whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, right? If you're not interested when you go to whatever the gathering it is or community that you're trying to join, being interested in other people, then I don't think much of it's going to work. This I actually took from an alum and a board member from Eckerd, who was one of the most well-rounded and amazing socialites I've ever seen. And quite honestly, I was just admired how she was able to meet with people and create new connections. And the thing she said is, I am interested in other people everywhere I go. People are fascinating. They all have different histories, different interests, different values. So just getting to know people is just a natural instinct for her. And so I try to adopt that as well. Introductions. I know these can sometimes feel a little awkward, especially when we don't know how to handshake anymore. But everyone loves when someone comes up and smiles and says, hi, my name is Grant. It's so nice to meet you. And then ask a couple genuine questions. So you don't typically ask people about their family history. After that, so don't go too deep, too quickly. Maybe just keep it in the present moment. These are great appetizers, aren't they? Oh my gosh, I love the decorations here. What a beautiful home you have. How did you so I think, just let conversations happen organically and flow. But usually it starts with introduction. So if the very least you've got to do is even practice with friends, just introduce yourself and smile, and it goes a really, really long way. And last but not least, everyone loves to get an invitation. So, if you're not in the mindset to accept one, don't accept one, because you don't want to show up and be that person who's not ready to be engaging. But, accept them if you can, and accept them if you're ready, and extend them as much as possible. I have a friend who is the most painful introvert I've ever met. And he is the one who texts our couple groups of friends more than anyone else. Hey, do you want to go watch fireworks? Hey, this thing is happening in Curtis Hickson Park. I think he gets alerts from anything happening in Curtis Hickson Park. There's a festival, there's a this, there's a that. He may not say 2 words the entire time we're with him, but he's the reason that we're all together and doing it. So, just extend an invitation, whether it's written or text or email or verbal. People love to receive those. So if you can find something to do, invite a person or 2 to go with you to do it. And if it's overwhelmingly social, cut back and go with fewer people. Okay. Here is some of the parting thoughts. I know this is tough, but let Eckerd go, but you can find so many ways to love it for the rest of your life. Don't let your job become your only identity and your only community, personally and professionally. Expand the circles as much as possible, especially right after you graduate, because you need those relationships to feel like you're home or you have a new home, even if it's in St. Petersburg. There again, there's way more to do outside of Eckerd than in, and this is no dig on Lova Patterson. She puts together a tremendous calendar of events. But, in the community and in Tampa Bay, there are so many things you can get involved in so many ways you can give back, in so many ways you can, have fun. And last but not least, during COVID, again, just continue to nurture all of the relationships and all the things, all the people that you care about while we go through this difficult time. Because, again, I really believe in 10 years from now, this will be a memory. This will be something, that we just kind of reflect back on. And certainly not many of us are going to say great things about it, for sure. But I do think it will pass and the economy will come back, and all of you have opportunities. And when you get stuck along the way, have us here to be able to help you. So I think we have a couple minutes. If I can figure out the question module of Zoom. Mike, are you able to read any that we might have?
I can help out with any questions. So first question, how can students stay in touch with Eckerd? And also, should they stay in touch, or should they kind of branch out on their own when they're first starting out?
So I think the way most alumni stay in touch with Eckerd is to stay in touch with each other first and foremost. So in a personal sense, I think, again, nurturing those relationships is some way of always connecting back to the college. Now, I would invite you to interject more to those conversations than just the good old days at Eckerd College. Nobody likes the person that only talks about college or only talks about work when they're having personal conversations. So in a personal sense, maintaining those relationships, I think, is paramount. Second, we have an entire alumni engagement office. and they're brilliant, and they put on events, and they're even doing a digital one just for people living in New York City, I think next week, which is going to be a great opportunity for everybody from that area. So if you want to get alumni together in your particular region, in your particular area, call up the alumni for sure, and see what they have going. So that is the primary portal to reach back to Eckerd. Of course, our office is available to support students who, and alumni who either want to help students or need help themselves. So that's one entry point. I will say, back to Linda's point about Eckerd alumni and how much they love this place. Alumni weekend is one of my favorite weekends of the entire year. I'm so glad we actually got it off the ground this year before everything closed down, because the joy, the relationships, the memories, the new experiences, the new communities, the new excitement is amazing. So if you do absolutely nothing else, come back to Eckerd to either visit or for the alumni weekend, and do pay for a couple of the events. I mean, yeah, you can. Some people try to get under the radar with some of that, but go to a couple dinners, go to a couple networking events. We had one ourselves, and there was so much interaction between current students and alumni. It was just a beautiful thing to see. So I'd say the alumni engagement office, staying up to date with them, staying up to date with the calendar. This is something I haven't done a ton with my undergrad, and I wish I had in those early years, was to go back and visit and see all my mentors and talk with them, because these places change. People come and go. So the earlier you do this, the better. And the answer to the second part of the question, yes, you should stay in touch and keep engaged with Eckerd. And if you feel like you need a total mental break, do that. But just know, if you wait 4 or 5 years to reach back out to the institution, it could be vastly different. You may feel a little disconnected from it at that point.
So another question we have is, knowing what you do know now, what would you have done differently when you were graduating college and trying to make friends?
I I don't I don't know. I don't know that there's anything I necessarily would have done differently. When I graduated college, I moved to a new town, and um, I had a combination of friends, of new friends that I met through work, and other friends through them, and then I met a lot of friends. I moved with 2 women that I graduated college with, and so we knew other alums that were living in Nashville. So we met friends through them, and my friend group expanded pretty quickly because there were so many friends of friends, and we went to events constantly. Yes, we went to lots of bars and clubs, but we also went to tons of concerts. There was there were very kind of niche little pockets of Nashville where you could see different kinds of music, and so we'd kind of get to know a group that really liked to go to this really cool old bluegrass bar, and we'd have a fun group that did that every Tuesday. And so I don't know that I would have done a lot differently. I feel like I had a good balance of meeting new people and being connected to the alums that I was living with.
And I feel like when I got to New York, there were so many things to do, that sometimes it was overwhelming, the opportunities. And one of the things I realized is that, especially as a couple, it's sometimes great to plan things out a couple days, if not a week. There is nothing better than knowing on Wednesday what you're doing on Saturday night. You get to look forward to it. You're like, oh, I've got 3 more days of work, 3 more days of email, and then I've got something to do. So I think for me, I would have been a little bit more brave in sending out invitations, a little bit more brave and just introducing myself to maybe a couple people that I hadn't. But more than anything, I'm a little bit of a pre-planner, and I think I would have just, now realizing the value of looking forward to things to do, I probably would have started the text chain on a Monday or the weekend before, or even 4 weeks out. If I've got a 3-weekend vacation at a cabin with some friends, and 4 weeks from now, it expands the benefit and the excitement of that experience for weeks to come. So I would have been a little bit more pre-planning, to be able to go out and do things. And then all of a sudden you're not sitting at home with a TV dinner on a Thursday night being like, well, I could have gone to that thing, around the corner from my house if I'd only known about it last. So I think trying to stay up with it, and again, not chasing after it, but just, that seems interesting. Let's plan it. Let's make a plan and let's go do that, is something I would have done.
Nice. And the last question we have is, based on like what you guys have seen in your years at Eckerd, what is the biggest one struggle, if you could say, of what students struggle with transitioning from college to the real world, if you will? And what would your advice be to them?
The one.
Just one. I know it makes it tough.
I think that's what sparked this conversation for me. I think it's not anything having to do with not being able to find a position, not being able to find a job, not being able to find a new community, not being able to find a cool new city to go live in and something to experience. Most Eckerd students have already done this, right? You've already moved hundreds of miles from home and started a new life. I mean, you've already done this. So I think it's not the action. I think it's the mental outlook of being, ready. Even if students say, I'm 100% ready, I'm ready to go, we're done with Eckerd, right? There's still, they have to experience what that change is like. And I think going into it with the right mindset, an open mindset, is one of the things. If you can have the job, you can have the bonus, you can have the career, you can have the reload package, you can have a new car, you can live in a new apartment. But mentally, if you're not ready to accept that you've moved on to this cool new chapter of your life, right, then it's hard to do it. So I think having the right outlook and approaching all of these changes is pivotal.
Yeah, I agree. I think that that's why I was so happy to see that you had this, because I think, and I talked about this at the beginning with the grief, I think Eckerd is such a small, tight-knit community. And so I think what I see students struggle with is, and this is true for Eckerd, I think more so, but often for any college that anyone's leaving, it's going to be the first time for many of you that you're in a situation where your friends are not already built into your community necessarily. Like, you're going to have to make more effort. You're not going to potentially, be living in a dorm or a residence hall where everyone else goes to the same school. And, it's the first time. That doesn't mean you won't meet neighbors. I've met neighbors who became great friends, but it's going to be different. So, it's not high school, it's not college where everyone is shoved together and, almost inevitably you eventually, even if it's not during autumn term, which everyone thinks it's supposed to be, you eventually find that group. And so it just takes a little bit more effort. And so I'm so glad that, Grant, you put this together and talked about ways to put yourself out there into community. It still happens. I am in my 40s, and a couple of years ago, I was like, I really need to make more friends outside of work. And so I put myself out there. One of my best friends I met at an art opening. Like, we just struck up a conversation, and it was nerve-wracking. Like, I asked for her email. It was more nerve-wracking than dating. Like, because there's less rules around it, and we don't talk about how it works as much. And I remember being nervous to email her. And when we finally got together, we totally hit it off. Like, she actually came over last week for some socially distant socializing on the patio, like 10 feet apart. But, it was challenging. And so it will continue to be. I love that Liz Lemon, where she's like, how do adults make friends? Like, it can be challenging, but it will happen.
Yeah, and you'll forget how it ever happened. You suddenly just be best friends, and that'll be that. So it's so much to look forward to. And I just thank you, Linda, for joining us and for talking about the transition and all your expertise in that area. So
thanks for having me. This was fun. Thank you all for getting on here. I know we're all having some Zoom fatigue, so thank you for showing up.
And if you have any friends who really need to hear this conversation, whether it's now or in 2 months from now, we are going to make it available for a time on our website. So please share it with them.
Perfect. Well, thank you all so much. You take a nice lunch break right now, and then 1 o'clock we'll come back and we'll talk about renting and leasing an apartment.
Gotta have a place to live.
Gotta have a place to live.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.